In this video, we're going to discuss webhooks. Odoo 17 has brought a ton of new features, but one of my favorites is the introduction of webhooks. Webhooks allows us to send information and receive information from external sources, and we can leverage that information to automate workflows or send information or data to external parties, whether that's sending some information to a spreadsheet or an external system, so that we can do some work outside the system where necessary. Today, we're going to take a look at how we can receive data into the system via webhook, as well as how we can send data out of the system using those same webhooks. We'll also look at tools to utilize webhooks in an efficient manner, as well as how we can leverage existing tools such as If This and That or Zapier to create workflows that will help us automate some things that we might want to do outside of our Odoo ecosystem. So webhooks in general is a technical topic, but I believe that anyone can utilize them, at least in the simplest form. As I mentioned, they essentially allow us to subscribe to data. So changes on a sale order can be sent out automatically on the save of a record. And those changes or those fields that we want to send out will be triggered in real time. Or if something happens outside of the system, we can then update the system accordingly based on a webhook link that we provide to the outside source. So let's take a look at that. They're going to be available to us in Studio for any model that we're in. For this example, we'll just simply click into Sales and we'll go into Studio. The first thing you'll notice is at the top of our screen, we have a new menu item called Webhooks. So I'll click on that. I have a webhook created for us that we'll take a look at in just a minute. So let's create a new one for now, just so we can run through some of the fields. So I'll click on New here. The first thing we're going to see at the top of our screen is where we can enter the name of this server action. So I'll just call this Automation 2. Then we have the model. We're currently in sale.order, so it defaults to sale order. The trigger, which is on webhook, because we are in that webhook menu item, so it defaults to webhook. But there's a ton of new triggers that we can take a look at as well. Today we'll just look at webhooks. Next, we have the URL, and this is a URL that you want to keep safe. As mentioned down below, we can refresh that secret key as well, so that if this gets out, we can just refresh it and have a new endpoint to call. But essentially what this is going to do is allow us to send data, or rather receive data in from this webhook. So we're going to provide this URL to an outside party, and then once this URL is called from the outside party with some parameters or a payload, we can extract that data and use it to decide how we are going to update our system based on that information that we've received. And we'll take a look at this in just a bit so it will all make sense in case you're not familiar with webhooks. Down below, we can log our calls, and it will be available in our logs file at the top of our screen so that we can troubleshoot any errors that we might be receiving. And then on the right, we have our target record. So this will default to some stuff here. This is if you're communicating between Odoo environments. But we're going to have to change that a bit, and we'll see that in our other example in order to extract the data we need when we're not utilizing a Odoo environment that we're communicating with. But basically what we're going to look at is when we send a webhook notification, that's going to come with a payload, and that payload is going to have some data, and we're going to want to extract that data from the payload in order for us to trigger some record in the system to be updated. So for example, we might provide an ID in our payload, which will tell the system in sale order, we want to update record 1 or record 20 with some information, whether we're changing a field, we're logging a note, we're creating an email, sending an activity. And based on all of this information, once we receive a webhook notification, we can run any action or a series of actions. So I can click on Add Action here, and I can update a record, I can create an activity, send an email, etc. Now, when we're utilizing the default types here, so whether it's update a record, we won't have access to any of the payload that comes with it. So we can just simply do regular automation. So maybe whenever we get notified in the system that something happened outside the system for a particular record, we want to hard code, maybe we log a note or create an activity or send an email. And that's pretty simple, right? We can just click on send email here. When that gets notified, we'll send out email to someone. Or maybe we're going to add a follower, or we're going to change the name of a field somewhere or log a note. And we can do that using the existing types. But you can also execute code. And this code is going to allow us to use some of the parameters that are set, or the payload that is set and passed to us via that webhook. So we'll take a look at that in our example as well. So I'm going to close this out and I'm going to go into our existing automation. So automation 1 here. Now in our target record, what you're going to see is I'm doing a model.browse. So this model here is a default variable that is available for any model that we're in. So it's going to say whatever model we're in, which is sale order, look for a particular ID. And we're going to get the ID that we want to update by going into our payload and calling the get method. And we're going to call and look for an ID field. This ID field can be anything. I have it set as ID, but it can be number, it can be whatever variable name you want to give it. So I'm going to switch gears for a second and look at Postman, which is going to allow us to send a request over. And I'm going to look at what we're sending and what the payload looks like. So in our URL here, we see our URL. If we copy that in Postman here as an example, and Postman is just a tool for us to test this out, we're going to send a post request to that URL, and we're going to send some payload, which is a body. This is going to be JSON, and we have an ID here and a message. So this ID is the ID of the record that we want to update. Next, we have the message that we want to utilize. So this is just a payload message that we're going to use in order to log a note inside of the chatter. Now, in this example, we're going to execute Python code, which is going to take this information and log a note inside of the system. So if we take a look at our execute code here, we'll scroll down a little bit. And what we'll notice is that we're just going to get the data that we need from that payload. And in order to get that data, we're doing a request.getJSON data. And then the data might also be inside of the HTTP parameters, and that's why we have this except here. So if the data is not in the JSON data, we're going to also be able to grab it from the HTTP parameters. Now I'm just going to assume here that it's going to be in the JSON data that I'm providing in this payload. And then we're going to be able to use that data. So once we get the data, the payload, we're going to extract the message, and we're also going to extract the record ID. And then here I'm just going to trigger a note inside the chatter, and this is just the parameters that we need in order to create that note. We have the author ID, and the author ID here I set to 2, which is the res.partner ID for Odoo bot. In this database at least, and it can be anyone, but I chose to use Odoo bot. Next, we have the model. Now we can pass in the model, but I'm going to hard code it in as sale.order. We need the ID, which is the ID that we're passing in from Postman or from whatever service the webhook is coming from. And we also have the message, which is the message that I'm also providing in the payload. So just to recap here, and just to finish, we have a message type, which is a comment, and the subtype is 2, which is a note. This is all a little bit technical. You don't necessarily have to run a Python execute code, but here I think this is a good example of how we can utilize payloads inside of our webhook trigger. So all of this, what this is going to do is, just to recap, we have our request, and we're going to get the JSON data. And then from there, we're going to create a note utilizing some of that information that's in the payload. So as soon as I trigger and send this post request, based on this ID here, a new record or a new note will be created in the chatter. So I'm going to close this out, and we'll look at one of our sale orders. So maybe we go to sale order 7 here, and I'm going to update my ID here, and I'm going to write in 7, and I just have this record was sent by a webhook. So what we'll do here is just click on send, and we'll see our status down below if it was successful or if we get an error. So I'll click on send, and it says status okay. So everything should have worked as we expect, and I can refresh this, and we'll see Odoo bot just now. This record was sent by a webhook. So now we can see how we can utilize webhooks to communicate from external sources into Odoo. Now we might have wanted to do something more complicated, and that's certainly possible. I wanted to keep it simple for this demonstration. One thing to keep in mind, as of right now, you need to have the website module installed in order to utilize those parameters or that payload that gets sent over. This may change in the very near future, and if it does, I will update inside of the description of this video so you know. Now I want to talk about a couple of other options. Now we can execute Python code, but maybe we want to just do something simple like update a record. So I'll create a new one here, click on new. And maybe this is something where I'm just going to fill in, maybe I change the salesperson on the record for whatever reason. So I'm going to say change salesperson based on webhook. And this is just a silly example. Under my action here, I can go update the record, and maybe I change the salesperson, and I can choose a value here. So we have just one person available, which is Mitchell admin. So maybe that's not a good example for us. Let's try something else. Let's say we're going to change the customer, and we'll change the customer to Abigail Peterson here. So I'll save and close this. And for this, we don't necessarily need to do too much. I do need to update my target record because I need to make sure that we're pulling in the ID in which we want to update. So let me just reference back to our original webhook. And I'll just copy and paste this. So again, we're going to do model.browse. We're going to look for the payload and the ID. And for this example, I'll change the ID name just so we can see that can be anything. I'll just say customer. And we're going to convert that to an integer because that is the ID field type. So I'll save it just in case it comes over as a string or something. And here I'll just change this to name, or rather customer. And we don't necessarily need this message, but there can be other information in here. It doesn't necessarily matter. We don't have to use it. And I want to update my string here. So I'm going to copy this, or my URL. And I'm going to change this. And now we're going to look for customer is just the ID of the record. Again, I just changed this. Or actually, let's make it more realistic. I'll say customer ID, and we'll do actually record ID. Record ID. And I'll save this. And now when I trigger this post from Postman into the system, we're going to update record number 7 to have a customer as Abigail Peterson. So that should all work. Let me just click into number 7 here. We see the customer is currently Gemini Furniture. Let's try and run this. We get a status of OK. And if I soft refresh my screen here, we see that sale order number 7 switched from Gemini Furniture to Abigail Peterson. And we see that did update in the chatter as well. So you can see how we can utilize webhooks to make changes in our system based on outside sources. Now, in addition to webhooks receiving information, we can also send updates out to another system. And in order to do that, we can do very much the same thing. We can just create a server action. So maybe we create an automation. We can do it through server actions, or we can do it through Studio here. I'll go into automations, and I'll create a new automation. And I'll say we're going to be in the sale order, and the trigger is going to be on webhook. And what we'll do here, actually, rather, let's leave this and let's go into server actions. I'll create a new server action, and what I'm going to do here is click on send webhook notification. So instead of receiving information in, we're going to send information out to an outside system. So we're just going to, let's say we're going to send lead information. So when we create a new lead, we're going to say lead. So a leader opportunity. And now what we're going to do is on the leader opportunity model, we're going to send out a webhook notification. So send lead information. And what we're going to do here is just enter in the URL where we're going to send it. So just like we had a URL when we were receiving data in, our outside system is going to provide us with a URL to send information. So whatever platform you're using, you'll be able to send information. Now, there's a lot of tools out there that we can utilize to create workflows or automations. So if I wanted to say, when a new lead comes in to our system, maybe we want to put it in an Excel sheet somewhere for whatever reason, or a Google sheet. So we'll look at doing that. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the fields that I want to come over. And for that, I'll just do the name. Let me search more here. So we'll just do, let's see, maybe we'll send over the description or the name. So I'll just do name here. We can send multiple fields. So maybe I do name and I do MRR, expected MRR. And we'll see on the right is the sample payload. So this is what's going to get sent out to our third party. So maybe we have the model, which is crm.lead. We have the name, send lead information, the ID, the name of the record, and the recurring monthly revenue that's set on that record. Now, this is not going to trigger anything by default. We also need to enter in the URL. So now I'm going to look at one tool that we can use to automate some workflows. And we're going to do a simple example, but keep in mind that you can do this for pretty much anything. So maybe we're using an outside CRM, or maybe we're using some third-party services that we need to communicate back and forth in a simple manner. We can trigger rules in if this and that. So if you're not familiar with if this and that, or IFTTT, essentially what it allows you to do is say, if something happens, I want to do something else. And we can utilize APIs, we can utilize webhooks, and this is all really in a no-code manner. So we can really automate simple workflows without too much technical knowledge, at least not coding knowledge. On top of if this and that, there's also Zapier. And Zapier allows us to do something very similar. We can chain workflows together. So maybe we want to send out a webhook notification to a system like Zapier. Zapier will take that information in. Maybe we massage the data a little bit, send information off to an API using Zapier. And then based on that API, some information comes back. And then we trigger another webhook in this chain of events that updates some record in the system. So really the possibilities are endless with some of these no-code tools. Besides if this and that and Zapier, there's a ton of other tools or custom tools that you can build to trigger webhooks as well as receive information in. I'm just using some of these simple examples because they're easy to demonstrate. So we'll go to if this and that. This is some information for if this and that's documentation that we'll need to use, but I'll create a new if this and that app, and I'll click on create here. So I'm going to say webhook. And keep in mind, these are all the services that they offer. So all these different platforms that you might want to communicate with are available to communicate with on a platform like if this and that. So I'm going to search for webhook here. And I'm going to say receive a webhook request with JSON payload. So we're going to give this an event name. Maybe we say lead info. And I'm going to create a trigger. So once we receive information, which is going to come from Odoo, we're going to do something else. And that something else is going to be update a spreadsheet. So I'm going to say Sheets, Google Sheets, and I'm going to add a row to a spreadsheet. And I have this logged in as in my Gmail account. And I can add the rows in the event that I want to use. So here I have the occurred at, the event name. I can add ingredients here. So we might want to add from the JSON payload. We'll just add the whole JSON payload. You can specify exactly which fields, but again, we're just going to keep this simple. So we can go ahead and create this action and continue, and we'll finish this off. So now we've created a new action. We need to extract the URL that we need to call. And to do that, I'm just going to go to if this and that here. And we're going to get this URL that we need to call. So we're going to call this URL here. And we might need to make some changes. I haven't tested this too much, but let's go ahead and give this a try. So our if this and that URL should look something like this. So we're just putting in that lead info, which is the name of our event, and then our key that they provide for us. So now I have my send lead information payload should be all set up. Let me go back to our settings here. I just want to make sure that we're going to paste it into the right spreadsheet. So I need to provide the name of the file. For this, I'm going to change this spreadsheet name, and I'm going to utilize this spreadsheet. And just for simplicity here, let me update that, and we're going to call it test here. So let's update that action, update, and my app is updated. So it says connected. Let's check it, check complete. So let's go ahead and give this a try. So now what we need to do is send off the information. So what we'll do is, let's go into our CRM. And I'm going to go into Studio here. I'm going to create a new automation. I'm going to say on save, which can be on save or creation. What we'll do is execute an existing server action. So here, and I'm going to select send lead information, and I'm going to save and close this. And we're going to send lead info for webhook. Okay, so from here, what I want to do actually is update my apply on, or actually when updating. So I'm only going to send this information when I update the expected revenue. So let's go ahead and save that. So now we should send information only when our expected revenue changes for a new opportunity. And what this is going to do is trigger that automation that we created for the webhook. Now we might have to fine tune this, but this is just an example. I actually want to go back to my server actions because I realized we made a mistake here. And I'm going to update this from expected MRR to expected revenue because I don't have MRR activated right now. And now I'm going to go ahead and create a new opportunity and see if that updates our spreadsheet. So let's go ahead and go into CRM. And I'm going to go to the form view here, and I'm just going to click on, we're going to create a new record, and we'll update our expected revenue. And let's see if that updates. And we can see now that in our Odoo test spreadsheet, we got the name or the time, the server action name, and then we have the payload here. So we have new record test and expected MRR, or expected revenue rather. And again, we can massage that inside of if this and that to break out the parameters, set the fields, whatever we want to do. Again, this is just an example of how we can utilize webhooks to send out information. So those were two examples of sending and receiving information, as well as looking at if this and that, as well as Zapier, of how we can automate some of the communications that we might want to do. Just to recap, inside of our automation, so inside of Studio, and we go to Webhooks here, we can see our automation 1. In automation 1, we sent out information, or we sent in information via this webhook URL with a payload. Inside of that payload, we had a target record, and that record ID was set in the payload. So we're going to get the record ID. Based on triggering that, we're executing some code, and that code creates a new message inside of our chatter. Then we looked at doing a simple automation where we just updated the customer based on a different URL and a different name of that target ID, and we simply updated a record. Then we looked at creating a server action. Again, in server actions, we created a new server action that listens, or rather that sends out a payload to a third party. And those fields that we're sending out were the expected revenue and opportunity. And this is going to be the URL that's going to receive that data. Here we're using if this and that, but again, it can be anything. And this is the sample payload. And then we created an automation that says when we create a new opportunity and we update, or when we create an opportunity or updated opportunity and the MRR is set, or the expected revenue is set, we send out information to this endpoint, and that endpoint then does something with it. And that was triggered inside of if this and that, which we receive a payload with, or we receive a web request with JSON payload, and then we add a row to the spreadsheet, which ultimately updated our spreadsheet here with that information. Again, a couple of simple examples, but from there you can see exactly what you can do and how you can do it. I'm curious to see what kind of automations you would use webhooks for. So if you have any automations that you think are pretty cool, you should post them in the comments so that we can maybe do a couple more videos with some test cases. Let me know if you have any questions. And again, if any of this updates, I will update the description inside of this video.